Hey, friends, welcome to episode 552 of the My 123 Cents podcast. I am Kevin Huntsberger, joined once again this week by Chad Smart. And Chad, I guess we'll knock out any current modern day news and notes before we dig deep into this week's episode. But anything that you've seen that caught your attention? I know AEW had a couple of extended shows due to, I believe, the NBA basketball playoffs going on TNT and TBS, either or on those stations. And I guess there's been a little bit of action with the Truth, or I guess he's not the Truth anymore. It's Ron Killings. Uh, saw a pretty witty response from Naomi when it came to the fans chanting "What" on SmackDown on Friday night. But anything from your end that you've seen that has been news and noteworthy?
What did Naomi say?
Uh, So they're chanting "What." She's in there confronting Tiffany Stratton, and the fans are chanting "What" while she's doing it. And she turns to them and says, "Bitch, you know what I'm saying," or "Bitch, you heard me," or something along those lines. And I mean, it was just, I think, wrestling through the years, and we've talked about this before, it had or has, I think they're kind of veering away from it again, but maybe not. So scripted that, like, when talent is in the ring, sometimes they don't know how to react to a
Mhm.
hostile crowd or a heckler, if you will. Comedians, we see deal with that all the time, but sometimes they you know get a little discombobulated or flustered. And Naomi's response was just spot on, and she just kept right into her thing. Tiffany maintained, nobody broke character, if you will. I just thought it was an excellent response, and I guess we can talk about that as well as part of this episode. Is when fans, I don't want to say hijack the show, but the "What" chant now has been what, 20 plus years.
I was just going to say, I don't know if you watch Simon Miller on YouTube. He's with What Culture Wrestling. But he posted that August 16th, 2001 was the
Wow.
first time Steve Austin used Watt in a promo. So it's been almost 24 years that people have been annoying and need to get over it. I
Yeah.
mean, and you think about it, like there are, you know, fans today who weren't even alive
Right.
when the Watt chant started.
Yes.
I mean, that would be like you and I when we started watching wrestling, chanting for Chief Jay Strongbow and Pedro Morales.
Yeah.
It's like,
Wow. That's crazy.
yeah,
Really, even, I started watching in 83. I mean, that would have been going back 24 years. That'd go back into the 60s, or I
yeah.
guess the late 50s.
Like, oh,
Wow.
that Lou Thez. Yes.
Yeah.
His catchphrase was, ugh. I don't know what Lou
Go
Thez.
Hackenschmidt, go.
Yeah.
Wow.
Uh,
So
oh,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, no,
Uh,
I was going to say
um,
if you had anything going on.
no, I'm not really. I mean, the AEW shows, I mean, I guess 4 hours, we say for a pay per view is even long, but for a weekly TV show is definitely too long. Um, but I did like how AEW did like 2 hour Dynamite and then Collision. They stuck with kind of the same
Mm.
format. So when you put Adam Cole, the Baby, and his Papa Non group at the end of the 4 hour block, at least you give me a reason to turn off a half hour early.
So when you say they did it as Dynamite and Collision,
Mm-hmm.
at the top of that third hour, did they go off the air and then come back and reset the set, or do they have a different set and
They don't.
commentary team and all that?
They have a different commentary team. They don't have a different set, but they would run over and then they would like fade to black and then come right back up and
Oh, okay.
switch. Yeah. So I mean, it's like and I'm guessing they did it one because they have two different shows, but also um, ratings wise. If you think back to the Attitude Era, you had Raw and then you had Warzone, and they
Yeah.
would do that so that they could, instead of averaging 2 hours as one show, you had two 1 hour shows, so your ratings would be a little bit
Yeah.
higher, so you could charge more for commercials. But um, yeah, I don't know where I was going with this tangent, but the AEW shows are fine. But something that I've been meaning to bring up for the last few weeks, and this is something that I've always kind of wondered over the last few years, but now I have proof because social media exists. Bianca Belair, you realize her hair is not her hair.
Tell me you knew that. You
I mean,
just
I
didn't
I
realize that?
suspected, but I
Oh,
had no proof.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So I am, because she uses it in a match,
Uh-huh.
why haven't they done a stipulation where her challenger says she has to either remove the hair or the hair has to, is a weapon and has to be.
Well, I think we as fans know that it's not real, but I
Yeah.
think in storyline it's her hair. I don't think I don't think everyone's in on it. I think that they sell it as
Mm,
really being her hair.
right. But the fact that she uses it as a weapon and leaves,
Yeah.
marks on someone, that should be. I mean, if Lex Luger can't use a forearm because it has an implanted steel rod, I
Well,
don't think.
remember when Sherry had her hair like that for SummerSlam '89 and Brutus Beefcake cut it off. So
Oh,
maybe we bring the barber back for a
maybe.
special
I
Bianca
mean, I'm sure he's
Belair
not busy.
stipulation. What's that?
I'm sure he's not busy. Yeah.
Probably not. Maybe he'll be at the next Saturday night's main event.
Oh,
So
you've heard the rumors for next Saturday night's main event, right?
I guess I haven't.
Well, it's in Atlanta.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Is the next one in Atlanta?
It's in July. It's going
Is that
opposite AEW's All
that's
In.
right. It's AEW that's in Texas. And
Yeah,
okay, yeah. Goldberg's last match, right?
that's the rumor. And that's the reason why Monday Night Raw happened this past week.
Hmm. Well, we're less than a month away. Hey, speaking of Raw, are you happy after your little YEETSUCK?
Yeet.
Yeet is over. Well, at least for now. So you
Yeet.
don't think though that they're going to put the belt on Goldberg?
Do I think they will? No. Would I be surprised if they did? No. So, I don't think the match, if that match happens, if the rumors are true, if that's going to be the match, I don't think the belt was needed
Right.
to be there.
100% not.
Yeah. Um, I know Big Quiche was not happy with the
Oh, I'm
outcome,
sure.
and
Did he post? I didn't see anything.
I've seen a few comments from him
Yeah,
that Jay was more over, and back in his day, the guy that was over got the belt.
that's not true. Road Dogg would have been world champion.
That's what I've been saying for the last 2 months.
Yeah.
Um,
I see your point of view, and I still, because it wasn't as if, you know, Demolition Axe went in
mm,
there and beat Hulk Hogan and became the champion.
yeah.
Like back in the day, that would have been unheard of. And I know you can't compare. It's not a fair comparison to say the Usos and Demolition are on the same
Mhm.
as individuals because they're both very, very solid tag teams. But I also think the Usos are better off as individuals than Axe or Smash were, or I guess
Mhm.
we saw with Crush
What do you mean? I mean, Crusher Khrushchev, Blacktop Bully,
Repo
Payne
Man.
Stewart, Repo Man.
But I still had trouble seeing Jay as anything beyond a tag team wrestler, even though he is wildly popular. Thanks to you, I have a box of the Eat cereal that I will be tasting and trying in the near future. Uh, but yeah, I didn't buy into it, even though I know millions of other people, fans, and
Mhm.
people who are actually buying tickets and going to events and stuff did buy into it. So it's interesting that they did do the switch the way they did as quickly as they did. I thought Jay would hold on to the belt a little longer. Is he going to fall into that category of being a transitional champion, not unlike the Iron Sheik or
Mhm.
Sergeant Slaughter, Jack Swagger, those guys that
Well,
held it one time and just for, a couple of months?
yeah, I would say for me, that's not a transitional champion when the title goes right back to the same person, which is, I guess, my
Mm,
bigger issue
that's true.
with
Yeah,
with
that's true. That's a good point.
with this whole situation is, the title goes back to Goldberg or Frank slip
Do not wish
back to
that into
Gunther.
existence.
Yeah, back to Gunther. The speculation rumor, which is way out there, would be Cody's going to dethrone Cena to get the title back. And to me, it's those stories aren't interesting when you're just trading back and forth like that. Like, especially given the amount of contenders that you could have. So
Well, and
you know,
this will tie into our conversation in a little bit, but I'm going to plant the seed now. That was 80s Jim Crocker Promotions. You know, Flair would win it, lose it, win it back, lose it, win it back, lose it until he eventually left the company. But that formula worked in that territory at that time. But like you said today, with the level of contenders that are out there, I don't know that works.
yeah, well, and I would say, it's presentation maybe as well. Like I've said, like WWE wrestlers don't really do anything necessarily that I don't like, but when it comes to presentation, which company will I watch more? WWE has always been my second or third favorite promotion, and I think it has to do with the way matches are formulated. It's a weird thing, but to go to your Flair comment, it's also the time that we live in now, where before Flair would have the title and you would get a pay-per-view match every quarter, or Clash of the Champions match. Same way, Hogan wasn't on weekly television. And now that you have, the weekly television is what we got as pay-per-views back in the 80s and early 90s. So the chances of a title changing hands, I guess, is more likely. Thankfully, not as likely as it was in 1999 when the title seemed to change hands every week. But does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that you have specifically talked about it in the past, is how the Attitude Era is remembered very fondly by a lot of people. Obviously, the Monday Night War, and we saw, those pay-per-view quality matches then lead over onto, because back before Nitro, Monday Night Raw, the main event of the first Monday Night Raw was The Undertaker versus Damian Demento. So we knew who was going to win that match, but then we start getting some Steve Austin versus The Undertaker, or The Rock versus Mick Foley or Mankind. So, on one hand, it improved the quality of weekly television, but in the same process, I think if we look at this historically and look back on it, it did kind of paint companies into a corner where you had to keep that level of excellence, if you will, going. Yeah. And then you do run the risk of overexposure. You're putting two quality guys against each other instead of that enhancement talent versus, in today's era, Cody Rhodes versus enhancement. We would never see that on Raw. And I know they were reporting superstars and airing it online. I don't know if they even still do that, but you said that AEW still kind of does some of the.
Yeah, I think Collision has more of the enhancement matches. Collision definitely is a step down from Dynamite because, and especially now in the last, 6 to 9 months, where Collision has taped more than they've aired live, I believe. But one of the problems with current WWE booking is there are no clean finishes. It seems like every match has to have a run in or a DQ or something, because for whatever reason, if they can't decide, okay, who has to win this match, if you're going to put Cody for this coming week on Raw, it's going to be Cena versus R-Truth apparently, or Ron Killings. Well, Killings isn't going to win the title, but he just came back. So is he going to lose, or is there going to be some shenanigans that take place? Whereas, over in AEW, they don't do the disqualification as much, but they do kind of rely on time limit draws to be more of their, like, if one person, they don't want to win, they'll just go the full 30 minutes, which, if done sparingly is fine. But when it becomes kind of like the norm, then it's just like, oh, okay, this is what you're doing again this week.
So since you brought up Cena, how do you think we're about 6 months away from the end of 2025? So you will be done. I believe that December Saturday night's main event at I think it's at Madison Square Garden.
Thought it was in Boston.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It is. I don't know why I was thinking MSG, but anyway, um, do you keep the belt on Cena till the end? Does he walk away with it and quote unquote ruin wrestling, or is he going to turn face here before the end of his run?
I think he'll turn face. I don't think he needs the title, especially if he's going to turn face and kind of if you're going to do a redemption story to send him out. And so does that mean, you know, given the amount of time that he has, I would say maybe he loses at SummerSlam due to shenanigans, and then has time to reflect on the past year and call out The Rock for being a balding bitch and not showing up and costing him his retirement storyline. I don't know, but yeah, I don't see Cena leaving with the title, and I don't think you leave the title on him until the last show and have him get beat there. And they did it with the Summer of Punk when Punk's contract was up and he left with the title. But Punk had to come back, and I don't see Cena coming back after this year. So,
right. Yeah. At least not for us.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting. We'll talk more about those kinds of events happening as we count down and look forward to the end of 2025. This week, though, we're going to also talk more about our fandom as kids and teenagers and then even into our adult years. A few weeks ago, we talked about why do you watch wrestling? We asked that question, why do people watch wrestling? And actually got a handful of responses on the My123 Cents Facebook page. So if you haven't already, check that out, follow along, and then join the My123 Cents Facebook group and weigh in and part of the conversations that are going on there. But Chad, when you first started watching wrestling, I think you said before that you started watching somewhere around the first WrestleMania, which was in 1985. So about 40 years you've been. You remember, did you have a favorite wrestler at that point? Or who hooked you to become a wrestling fan? Different way.
Yeah, I've talked about how I think before I got into WWF, I was watching JCP, obviously on WTBS. Mid-South, I think Mid-South was probably like my go-to, because I remember it airing like during the week because we had the satellite dish, and I don't remember what station I was watching it from, or if it was like the feed. But I remember watching that and World Class. I'm trying to think, my memory with how things are is very suspect at my aging time, and to compare with how I feel today. And
sure,
because I want to say, when I say the Four Horsemen, I was really into them, but was I as a kid, or is that just as I've gotten older?
Right.
I mean, obviously I was once Luger came in, because I remember also watching Championship Wrestling from Florida and seeing when the Luger showed up for the first time, and but I don't remember like Kevin Sullivan and Purple Haze and all that with fond memory or any tangible memory. So I don't know where storylines were at the time, but I would say, Jimmy Snuka, I remember, was a big one. I think when getting into WWF.
Yeah.
I've said Hogan, I only cheered for him at WrestleMania 1, and that's because I hated Piper. So I don't really consider myself a Hulkamaniac. I don't think. I'm trying to think of who else. I mean, I like the Blade Runners in Mid-South, Eddie Gilbert. So yeah, I don't know who actually. I don't know. Maybe the Rock and Roll Express. And so yeah, there's a whole lot. We could probably just tape up a dartboard and let me throw a dart, and that person will take credit. So,
well, I've talked about it ad nauseum. you're watching, see the poster behind me that Chad actually got. This was a couple years ago. It was Kerry Von Erich for me. And even today, 40 plus years later, he's still, you know, when I do a Mount Rushmore, I don't do like a Mount Rushmore of the greatest. I do a Mount Rushmore of my favorites, and he is still on there, and it's that nostalgia. And I don't know if his untimely passing at age 33, he's been gone more than 30 years. If that helped preserve his, the fandom that I had, and I know people talk about the demons, and we've both seen and reviewed the Iron Claw movie. That's all well documented. But there was just something about that time and growing up in the '80s and just being captured into the whole wrestling machine. Before even I was watching the WWF, I was watching World Class and wrestling at the Chase out of St. Louis specifically, and the Von Erich were featured on both of those programs. So I think that's part of the nostalgia for me. But as I got older, and I also hated Roddy Piper, and I hated Ric Flair. And at some point, and I'm going to guess I was in high school, that changed for me with Ric Flair specifically. And I can remember cheering for him and rooting for him against guys like Sting. And, I liked Sting, but now I'm 17, 18 when he's wrestling Sting and losing the title. Sting, I think, was probably marketed more for that teen or that preteen crowd, those kids that would paint their faces and want the action figures and whatnot. And Flair was a more serious, if you will, wrestler. So I think that's probably about the time. And it's not that I disliked Sting, but I liked Flair. I liked the shenanigans, if you will, that the heel was playing and being part of back in the day. So how were you with Flair? Because at some point you turned around, or you came around to him too, or were you always a Flair fan? You mentioned the horse.
Yeah, like I said, I want to say that I always liked Flair, but I probably didn't. But I think I've liked him longer than I probably didn't, so it just has merged into it. Because I'm sure at Clash of Champions 1, I was cheering for Sting, and yeah, I don't know if it, when the Attitude Era came around, we talked about the cool heel coming into play. But to me, Flair was always the cool heel, and
Right.
And I like Barry Windham from his time in WWF, and so when he joined the Horsemen, Tully and Arn just, I think we're just solid hands, and I can't say, and the fact that they were 25 years old and looked 52, it just was weird. So yeah, I mean, I want to say that I enjoyed the Horsemen the entire time, but I can't give you any specific examples of what turned me around to them, or I think it was just Flair. Like I said, Flair's got the charisma and the promos, and yeah.
Is that somebody knocking at your door?
No, it's I apologize. My
Oh, no,
microphone apparently is like super sensitive today, and so it's like in the next apartment over. So if you hear a young child crying, I'm not kidnapping anyone. It is not my kid.
I thought, well, maybe you ordered something or you got
no, it's yeah. I think someone's hanging something on the wall, and my microphone just seems to be picking up everything in a 1 block radius today.
So for me, as you were talking, I was kind of going in my mind, and again, it's those early high school years for me. I was in high school from '87 to '91, and so that those first 3 years of high school, it was the Horsemen. It was Barry Windham, it was Lex Luger, Ric Flair, Tully, and all those guys. And I did not like them. I liked Dusty Rhodes and Sting and Nikita Koloff and the baby faces of JCB, if you will. And then, like I said, at some point, it all kind of switched around for me. And I think it probably was going into my senior year. I remember, Sid Vicious is in the middle of the Horsemen.
Yeah.
And that match, I believe it was in February of '91. they're in the cage and Sid lifts Brian Pillman up and hits his head on top of the cage and then power bombs him. That was such a cool presentation. The one and only action figure, WCW action figure that I had bought was the Sid Vicious figure. So again, I think that awe factor of these wrestlers that maybe catch your attention and then they stand out to you, and even if they are the bad guy, if you will,
Yeah.
they have that fan base, and I think, and then when Sid, because I can't remember, I believe it was Sid first that went to the WWF that summer of '91, and then I can remember watching. We were on vacation in Florida, and I was in the hotel room while everybody else was on the beach, and I was watching WCW Saturday Night, and they ran a crawl across the bottom that said, due to breakdown in the contract negotiations, Ric Flair is being stripped of the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. And I thought at that point, it was all still part of the show. And then lo and behold, a week or two later, Bobby Heenan is standing there holding the big gold belt. And that's when I really remember Ric Flair is the man. He's coming to the WWF. He's going to be here. He's going to, take out Hulkamania, because by that point, after 4 or 5 years of Hulkamania, I was over. And so I wanted to see something different, and not the Ultimate Warrior. And again, I'm a man now. I'm 18. I'm over the vitamins and the face paint and all that stuff, and wanted that serious education. And Flair, for me, since then, has been consistently at the top of my list. And I say that to transition into this part of it now is, at what point do wrestlers, and now that we have social media, we see their lives 24/7, we know what's going on, they say things, sometimes stupid things. At what point do you factor in a wrestler's, or anyone, but I know for the sake of this argument, we're talking wrestling, does someone's politics or their preferences, their attitude, their behaviors, does that influence you and your family? As you're watching, does it make you not want to watch a movie or go back and watch a match? I mean, obviously, the extreme case, guys like Chris Benoit, not sitting here to put it, because he at one time was one of my favorites. I really enjoyed him when he came to the WWF and did this thing there. But at what point do you change your tune or change your outlook towards a wrestler?
Yeah, I mean, and it is a big issue just outside of wrestling as well. And I would say, for me personally, I don't think there's anything that would make me not want to watch a match or a movie or anything, because I feel like separating the art from the artist is the big issue. And I mean, I say that, but I'm sure there is a circumstance that would be so heinous, and you would think that murder would be that in that line, but so far it has not been. But I think it's a weird thing, because with social media and people saying things that you may not agree with, and I think as a society we have to learn that difference of opinions are valuable. Not saying they're right or wrong, but saying if everyone agrees on everything, then there's no way society will evolve, because you have to have a difference at some point to throw in a new. Otherwise, you just become mindless. I don't want to necessarily say sheep, because it's not like you're following someone, but if you're all thinking the same thing, there's no, well, what about, this different thought. But if someone says something that I don't agree with on social media, I don't know, I probably just roll my eyes and move on and don't respond, don't engage, because a sensible adult, I'd like to think. So for me, it's not, that won't affect me, but when that becomes a pattern, I guess, of I'm just going to use Flair as an example,
Sure.
just
Please
because
do.
it's a solid example.
Yeah.
I like Ric Flair as a wrestler.
Yeah.
I think he should have retired when he lost the match with Shawn Michaels. I understand why he didn't,
Do you think,
because
let me cut you off for just a
yeah,
second. Did he go on too long? Should he have retired even before that? Should he have even done the 2001 return to WWE after the invasion?
I mean, I didn't have any problems with him coming back.
I didn't.
Yeah, I was fine because I think he was still putting on. I mean, he wasn't putting on the matches that he was in the '80s, but
Sure.
he wasn't embarrassing
Right.
himself.
Yeah.
Um, but I can understand when that's your entire life and that's your livelihood and you're used to it for 30 years to just go, okay, I'm done and I'm going to sit at home. And especially given the lifestyle that Flair was leading, or like, it doesn't work that way.
Sure.
But now with, and again, with social media, if social media didn't exist, I'm sure my opinion of Ric Flair would be different than it is because I wouldn't know what he was like in his real life or thing, and we joked about Rikishi, complaining about Jey Uso earlier. Rikishi's getting that same way where it's like, again, these people are in the wrestling industry and have been a long time. You should know I hate to say how it works.
Right.
So again, you can criticize, but if you do it in kayfabe, that's one thing. But to do it and be like, oh, I think this should be this way or this, it's like whatever. And then, yeah, and then Flair, again, I think even just the way he acts in public uh, is not. It's not something that I don't want to say idolized because I don't think anybody should be idolized, but it's not like something that should be encouraged or it's just like, dude, you're a 70-year-old man. Like you have to grow up at some point.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of been the transition, I guess, for me with him as well, as far as being a fan. I agree 100%. 2008, the match with Shawn Michaels. That 2008? Yeah.
Yeah.
Should have been in. He did the TNA thing for a little bit.
Mhm.
I know some people kind of like, oh, what? Because it was a wrestling retirement, but I think that particular retirement was probably the best send off a company has given a
Mhm.
talent. And I'll be curious to see what happens in December with Cena. But Ric Flair's retirement was hard to do. The match, the next night on Raw, the accolades and everything like that. And 2022 rolls around, Conrad, Jeff Jarrett, they all promoted and did what was Ric Flair's last match. It is what it is. Did it tarnish anything for me? No, because I think once you rang that bell of coming back in TNA, the whole WWE thing was already kind of soiled, if you will.
Mhm.
And like I said, it's kind of like with Sting. I hope that Sting, and I think he will, in his mid-60s at this point. I think AEW did a great job with that story and building him up as it being his last match. And he did kind of pass that torch on to Darby and the others that were in there. So it's like, you fault the guy for wanting to make a buck or get back in the ring and do something because, on a much smaller scale, I did Stride Pro Wrestling, ring announcing for 8 years, almost
Mhm.
every month, sometimes twice a month, on, like I said, a much smaller scale. But there are times that I miss it. And I could see where you want to be in front of that crowd and want to do
Mhm.
things and be a part of that. So I don't fault Flair for that, but I think again, like you said, it's the social media thing. It's the constant complaining about Charlotte not getting this push or that push, which I
Mhm.
get part of that too as a dad myself. I would say that I don't think I would be public about it. I may bitch about it behind closed doors.
Mhm.
But the other thing with him, and the thing that really in the last month has kind of put me over the edge with him, is the insults thrown at JR. Calling him an intention, something about getting attention
Mhm.
when he was talking about his cancer. And as someone who has then, a week later came out and said that he had skin cancer, I mean, it
Mhm.
just, something, and again, maybe, I know he's had issues, Nate Floyd has had issues in the past with substances and stuff like that. Maybe, I don't know. I don't want to judge too much, but I think
Mhm.
at some point, you think before you tweet or think before you put it out on social media or do whatever. Um, and it just does not leave a good look. And I know, and I jump in and look at the comments, and probably 95% of them are kind of berating him. But these are fans and followers of him, and then
Mhm.
he's putting stuff out there like that. So I think people get it. And it does, in my opinion, it is kind of tarnished legacy, kind of same with Hulk Hogan and his constant exaggeration and late. And maybe they're not. Again, I don't know what kind of issues these guys are facing from their head trauma. And think maybe it's all part of that. I don't know. So I don't want to judge too harshly, but I also find myself rolling my eyes a lot more when I see Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan on social media. And for me, guys like Stone Cold Steve Austin have moved up the rankings, if you will, in my head. And today, people are like, "Who's your favorite wrestler?" I'm like, well, today, I feel also kind of weird at 52 saying, "Ooh, Cody Rhodes is my favorite." He's not, but I like Cody Rhodes. I don't have a
It's
problem with him. I
Tiffany
do find him.
Stratton. Let's be honest.
What's that?
I said it's Tiffany Stratton. Let's be honest.
Tiffany
Or actually, I should say it's Nikki Bella. You're excited for her comeback, and the rumors of Brie coming in with her. So
uh, yeah. So I mean, I just watched today, and I want to be entertained. And yeah, there are some that I like more than others, for different reasons. I'm not I've never been a quote unquote work rate. At one point I did have work rate near the top of my list. So I'm not obviously looking at that. I'm just looking to
mhm.
be entertained and seeing what's out there and having fun with it. But gun to my head right now, if somebody walks in here and says, "Who's your favorite wrestler?" I don't know that I could tell you. I mean, I'm really enjoying Ron Kelly or R-Truth. And maybe I've jumped on that bandwagon. I've always liked him, but the recent turn of events with him has endeared him to a lot of people. I usually throw back and say, Steve Austin or Ric Flair are my all-time favorites. That, what I mean, does that ever come up with you? Do you talk to other people about wrestling outside of because actually, people find out that I have a podcast. I
Mhm.
actually ran into somebody at work this week who was doing research for the podcast we were doing at work and found that I have this podcast that he's able to. So we do start having those conversations with quote unquote civilians, and so it does become a thing. Do you talk about wrestling outside of this podcast?
I don't talk to people outside of this podcast. So um, no, I mean I've talked a little bit here and there, but not any serious conversations. And um, so yeah, I mean, other than saying like, "Oh, did you go to the show?" or um, whatnot, there's no, I couldn't tell you the last real in depth wrestling conversation that I had with somebody that wasn't you. So because nobody that I know follow that I hang out with, friend wise, watches wrestling. So
That's kind of a weird roller coaster too, because when I was in high school, I'll go back to
hmm,
middle school, high school years is when really I would say probably I was in fifth grade when I really looked into it. And then by junior high, I was all and there were guys that we would talk about it, but I didn't have like a dedicated wrestling buddy, if you will, that
hmm,
watched pay-per-views and did all that kind of stuff until my friend that I talked about before, who had the satellite dish, and so go to his house if he would record NSG channel, watch those shows and that kind of stuff. But
hmm.
uh, and then we became roommates in college, so we went to a couple of live shows at the Showman Center in Cape at SEMO. And then after that, we kind of lost touch in the rest of college. And didn't really have, I watched it still. I thought the magazine, and then I drug my wife to it. We talked several times about that
Hmm.
1995 TV taping in St. Louis that ended up going like 4 hours that she had
Yeah.
no idea. I didn't know at that time what we were getting ourselves into. So it's all kind of evolved and gone from there. And then I've moved from several different states. I worked in Alabama for a minute and did some camera work for an independent company there. But again, I didn't talk to, I was very introverted, so I didn't talk to anybody at those shows. In Alabama or in Indiana, I lived there for almost 5 years, and people were wrestling fans, and we would talk. We'd go watch the pay-per-views at Buffalo Wild Wings, but never went to any live events. And then moving down here, I met you, Travis Yates, Matt English, Mike Kahn. There was a handful of you guys that KAA and that KHA and no relation to Tony or Nick or Tejo. But it was a different environment, a different world, and you really, I mean, I know we still chat with Travis every once in a while,
Hmm.
very very rarely, just social media, maybe talk to Matt or Mike, but you and I kind of kept this nerdiness going for 20 plus years now. So beyond that, I have a couple of coworkers that watch and will occasionally say, "Hey, did you see what happened with blah blah blah?"
Hmm.
But again, I'm not sitting down and watching. Of course, my connections with Stride and some of the indie guys that are still here, Tyler, Jay Spade, and some of those guys will talk and maybe run into them. But I'm not. Again, it's kind of
Yeah.
that my friend group of 15 other people. None of them, although when I was watching Royal Rumble on my phone when we were a weekend getaway, all the guys kind of flocked on my phone.
Hmm.
There is a guy in our group, Bill, that watches occasionally, but yeah, it's different being a wrestling fan than an adult, I think, and there is still, I think, almost that stigma that.
Yeah. I mean, apparently at my last job, there were people that were wrestling fans but I never got to talk to them because working remotely, you don't have conversations like you would, if we'd been in the office and I got to know them better, probably would have come up. But,
Sure.
um, yeah. And there is still that stigma of, oh, you watch wrestling. Oh, and even though wrestling is more popular, I don't want to say more popular in terms of, I guess, pure popularity, but the acceptance of, I think we've kind of moved away from that's fake, right? Which you still get, but it seems to be less, which after 25 years of kayfabe being dead, you know, hopefully people that are watching understand it is a scripted program now, and that you're watching for the athleticism or just the characters themselves. You're not watching because you think, oh my gosh, is Goldberg going to be able to beat Gunther? Really? He's coming out of retirement. It's like, dude, it's Goldberg's already hurt himself 3 times. Shut up. Um,
I wondered if you had some.
um, but yeah, it's still, you know, and there. I'm sure you've seen the memes where it's like, I sit close to wrestling matches for the view, and then it cuts to like the back end shots of all the female wrestlers, and it's like okay, that's still
Yeah.
there, but or it's like, oh, I watch AEW, and then here's John Moxley bleeding, here's Darby Allin bleeding, here's Darby Allin setting someone on fire with a flamethrower, and you're like, what are you watching? So again, and we've said it before, to a wrestling fan you don't have to explain it, to a non-wrestling fan you can't explain it. It's just you like it or you don't. So
Yeah, and one thing I found interesting too, like when I was a kid, sixth, seventh, eighth grade, when we were going, like we would go to WWF or they were NWA sanctioned matches. I don't know, might have been Central States actually thinking, but they would always, being in St. Louis, we had wrestling, live wrestling a lot. And I went back, and it's crazy how many times the WWF actually would come to St. Louis in a year, month, sometimes a couple times a week. But anyway, there was a group of us that, our dads would all take us to the matches. And then, like I said, all those guys, all those kids kind of outgrew it. and I didn't. And it wasn't until then, like the late '90s, the Attitude Era specifically, that they got back into it. And they were,
Mhm.
I'd run into them at something, and they'd be like, "Oh man, did you see the NWO and what they did?" And so it was interesting. And now I'm sure none of those guys, they may have it, they may know who
Mhm.
certain wrestlers are, but it's again, that I don't want to say cyclical, but it does sometimes feel like it is. And I don't know, again, I don't know that it will ever see the popularity in terms of people watching eyeballs. I know money, monetarily, it's
Mhm.
business is booming, but I don't know that we'll ever see an era in where it was such a so woven into pop culture. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, I think both WCW and WWF at the time had superstars on the cover of TV Guide. I mean, that was huge. That TV
Yeah.
Guide was in almost every home in America back in the 80s and 90s. So
Yeah.
I don't see us picking up TV Guide. Probably it's not anywhere what it used to be, but with John Moxley or John Cena
Mhm.
or Cody Rhodes or Darby Allin, those are
Yeah.
my go-to AEW guys. But I don't see that happening in at least not in anytime soon. And I know a lot of the WWE guys pop up and pop up here and there. There were a couple that I can't remember who it was or what they were doing, but they were at some national big
Mhm.
time event, athletic event
Yeah.
or
Well, they
show,
just had a big
something.
Netflix presentation for their like rest of the 2025 year,
Yeah,
and
it might have been
a
that.
bunch of
So
WWE people were there.
yeah, so we see them at things like that, but I often wonder like how many, like I feel like Hulk Hogan obviously everyone knew back in
Mhm.
the 80s. Andre the Giant, people knew who he was. I think to a lesser extent, and really I'd say those were the two probably most recognized. Then you went into like this Steve Austin era where you
Mhm.
show up at something and you're like, oh, did you see something with Steve Austin? People talk like Randy, they'll like, oh, the macho, at graduate, I work at a college
Yeah.
graduation. I said, oh, cool, they're playing Macho Man's theme song. And
Mhm.
people knew what I was talking about. So
Yeah.
there are those that kind of transcended and still today are part of that pop culture conversation. But
Yeah.
again, I don't, maybe we're too close to it. Other than John Cena, I don't see anyone kind of sticking out as a, and I'm not counting Logan Paul for obvious reasons, but that
Yeah.
kind of stand out as that wrestler, pop culture individual. Rock too, but he's not actively. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's weird because, like, MJF was in Iron Claw, small role. He's in Happy Gilmore too. If you watch the trailer, he's prominently in probably at least a good fourth of the trailer. I don't know how much, how that will translate to the actual film, like how many speaking lines or how much of a focus will be. But and Liv Morgan was just off to go shoot a film. Just came out that what's her face? I can't think of her name. The one night Naomi attacked Jade Cargill. She's just got cast in a film. Like I think there's more acting ability or acting opportunities now, but they don't seem to be as high profile as, say, the Scorpion King was when The Rock first joined. And obviously, different time frame, so much more content
Right.
to consume. So even if something is big, if there's a big role, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be seen by a lot of people.
That's what I was going to say because you mentioned sport, and obviously,
Uh,
20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, we looked forward to those summer blockbusters. We would go to the movies and actually count down and look forward to. And now everything is almost instantaneously at the touch of your fingers. You have the right streaming services. So
mhm,
it will be interesting to see like what happens.
yeah.
I know that I haven't seen the trailer for it, but I knew that from there I saw, I guess, the picture of him. I can't remember who he's with, but he posted like stuff. Um, I think yeah, I don't know if there's anyone else. Anyway, I
Mhm.
you know, it is an interesting sidebar of the content that's out there. Because, like you said, not only do we have movie theaters, big screen movies, but there's a lot that's coming straight from streaming. Do those get the view?
Yeah.
Expect
Well, and I would say too that you can't, and this is the problem with WWE of the last few years, is you can't produce a mainstream talent. What I mean by that is Hogan, launched the Rock and Wrestling promotion with Cyndi Lauper, but he had the charisma and the presentation to go outside WWF. The Rock came along. The Rock and Steve Austin were your top two guys in the Attitude Era. Austin really didn't translate to the mainstream as much as obviously The Rock has. And Austin has a line of films and TV appearances, he seems to be content with his ranch and doing what the stuff that he does. So it's not like he's out there trying to be, to follow The Rock. I don't think Roman Reigns has the charisma to bring people in from the outside to watch wrestling. As much as you want to promote him, and as well as he did the tribal chief character, I just don't see it, appealing to non-wrestling fans. And same with AEW right now. Moxley isn't going to bring people in. I don't think Darby will bring Hangman Page. They're not, and this isn't meant to be a criticism of them, but they're just not mainstream attractions, I guess, for lack of a better word. Like, they'll appeal to wrestling fans. And if you get people to give them a chance and watch, they may win them over, but they're not going to look at them and say, and be captivated right from, within the first 30 seconds.
Yeah. And I think part of it too.
And real quick, you look back at, in the 80s, Ric Flair, like we said, you and I, big fans. Flair wasn't transcending JCP or the NWA, even when he was appearing on Learning the Ropes and whatnot. But, he wasn't getting the Sports Illustrated cover, even though he was arguably a better wrestler than Hogan. So
it was in that instance, because Flair had later said on his podcast, they asked why we didn't get Hogan Flair at WrestleMania. Again, you and I are hardcore. We're buying magazines, we're watching Saturday night, we're doing all these things. The penetration that Jason had wasn't as old WCW by that point, wasn't what it obviously became. And Ric Flair going to the WWF, a lot of people didn't know who he was. I was surprised to hear Mick Foley talk about this. As Cactus Jack, he was in WCW, he was in ECW. I thought that's why, and I think, and this could be a topic for a whole other podcast, changing that, in my mind, why wouldn't you have Cactus Jack?
Yeah.
And doing this? Instead of bringing him in, I went back and listened to the Mankind podcast where he talks about the thing. And it's genius on Vince McMahon and WWE creative part of creating this new character. And, how many people didn't realize at the time? Like you said earlier, you didn't realize that Bianca Belair, both are ponytail is a human. And there were people that didn't know, which again was global, but that Mankind was Cactus Jack, wrestling Van Hammer and Abdullah the Butcher and Sting, a year and a half earlier.
Yeah, I remember it took maybe a few weeks before my cousin and I were like, wait, Goldust is Dustin Rhodes. And Raven is Johnny Polo.
Yeah. And I wonder too, because those were gimmicks, the ones which were like very early. I was on those message boards all the time. So I knew Goldust or Dustin was coming in as Goldust. Somebody leaked it or reported it. And so I kind of expected that. But I do wonder if the internet was around and as popular as it is today, social media specifically, when Flair made the jump to WWE, would it have been a bigger deal? I think, yeah, I do think less because, and I'm not throwing shade, but I don't think AEW would be as known as it is today without the benefits of.
Oh no, no, because the
And
Bullet Club
obviously,
wouldn't be known.
what's that?
The Bullet Club wouldn't be known in
Right.
America as well as it is without the internet.
So, or as many faults as the internet does have, there's obviously some good
Well,
applications.
yeah, and I'm going to piggyback off that thought real quick. Like even the internet popularity is distortion through reality. You know, because something can look really popular on the internet, but you realize it's just a giant echo chamber. You know, and you step out of that echo chamber, no one's like, "What do you?" You know, I don't. I mean, I look at it with music. And it's like, "Oh, this person's really huge," and like, I've never seen anything about this person online whatsoever. And even back in our day, and I'm just saying, throwing this out because it's in my head and I have to get it out, is like, you know, we're the MTV generation. We remember Dial-In TV, Motley Crue, Home Sweet Home. They had to change the rules for how long a video could be on the top 10 because it was on like the top one for like 3 months straight. You would think that song is a huge song for Motley Crue. It is not a top 40 hit. I think it peaked at number 83. It wasn't getting radio play, but it was getting video play. So again, to the people watching MTV, it was huge. To the people that just listened to the radio, it was nothing. So I think there's a huge topic here to discuss more with like perception versus reality. So,
And we're almost an hour into this one, but yeah, I do like that idea. And maybe in the next couple of weeks, we can sit down and hammer something out along those lines. Because like you said, without the internet, you know, we don't know Bullet Club or some of those other groups. I would be curious to see how the internet would have impacted the attitude era, you know, with social media, because we were just like I said, we're just getting into the internet, and that's where Eric Bischoff was getting the results to spoil on Nitro, because people were able to post it and email it or whatever. And a year, 5 years earlier, you know, we're in 1990. Nobody it's a smartphone.
I mean, ECW had an event called Cyber something. I can't remember the exact name, but it was like a gathering for the internet fans of ECW. Like that's how they, because again, without the internet, would ECW have been popular? You know.
Yeah, I like that. We'll definitely tackle that one in the next few weeks. Talking about that. Anything you want to say before we wrap up for this week's episode?
Totally off topic, but I will just say that I recently read Johnny B. Bad, or I should say Mark Merrow's book, From Bad Did 2Ds to Good. It's an interesting book. I'd recommend checking it out if you have a chance. Learned a lot about Merrow that I did not know, like the fact that he burnt down his house when he was 5 years old. So awesome. But yeah, and it's a good positive story. So maybe you can have him come speak at your college sometime.
I've actually thought about that, believe it or not. Yeah, hell of a salesman if you get the book. All right. Well, that is going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you for listening and or watching, and we will see you next time.